Hi, I'm Chad Post, and welcome to the 2-Month Review. This is a weekly podcast that we've been doing through Open Letter Books and the 3% website, by which every week we talk about a particular title for like 8 to 12 episodes, essentially, and go through it bit by bit, section by section, talking about it, enjoying it, appreciating it, trying to get people excited about reading these different books that are generally considered to be fairly challenging, long, dense, whatever, and essentially giving anyone who's listening a chance to different entryways into these type of books. We've done 2 seasons already. One was on Rodoreda Frazan's The Invented Part, which is a big, fat, long novel that's one of the most amazing novels ever written, but very daunting if you look at it. But if you listen to our podcast, you're going to be like, God damn, that's the best fucking book I've ever heard about in my life. I love this book. And then the second one we did was Thomas Jansson bestseller by Gudbjørg Bergson, which is the Icelandic Ulysses, which is a crazy, very wordplay-based, strange book about the problems of fascism in Iceland, so very relevant to our time. And then for the third season, what we decided to do was focus on Mercè Rodoreda, who is a Catalan author who passed away in 1983. Expert, am I right? 83? 82?
I think there's some debate around it, but yeah.
It's like Tupac. Right? She may not be dead, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah. She might still be out there. It's possible.
We should keep looking.
Maybe she's here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if she is, she can answer some questions about this book for us. But we've done, since her books tend to be short, she has a few novels that have been published in English, they're all fairly short. So the first part of this season, we went through her selected stories and talked about all of her stories for 6 weeks, was it? And then we switched over to Death in Spring, which is her posthumous novel, published in 1986 originally, that was translated into English in 2009 and published by Open Letter Books, translated by Martha Tennant. So we've been talking about this for a few weeks, and tonight what we're going to do is go over the last section of it, talk about it generally, answer any questions people might have, so on and so forth. But to get started, I introduced myself, but I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm joined as always by Brian Wood. You have a mic this time, you can actually interject.
Hello, we got wine up front. If you want some wine, come on up.
Yeah, this is one of our livelier episodes. We never drink on our other episodes.
I was on cough syrup one, deep, so that kind of counts.
And other than that, this is exactly like one of our episodes, but with more pants. And we're joined this time by Christina, you just want to go by Christina Hall, who is the expert, the Rodoreda expert, who works for the Ramon Llull Institute, and who has a nice bio, which is that you're a Mexican-American poet and immigration activist. Christina has a bachelor's in creative writing and political science from Columbia University, and a master's in translation studies from, is it Pompeu, Fabra University. Catalan and Spanish translator. She is no longer currently a professor of English at the Tec de Monterrey in Mexico City, but her work can be found in Cipo Mag, Leveler, The Femme, and Registro MX.
Registro MX.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you're all in. So welcome. Thank you for joining us to talk about Rodoreda and Death in Spring.
Yeah.
And to get started, I know you work at the Ramon Llull Institute. I wonder if you want to say a few words about what that is and how kind it was for you guys to provide wine for everyone. And then maybe a little bit about how you came to find out about Rodoreda and become a devoted lifelong expert.
No, well, I'm definitely not this lifelong expert, though I am devoted. And, well, let's see. First questions first. So, Institute Ramon Llull is a public institution. It's actually a consortium sort of between the Generalitat of Catalonia, so the Catalan government, you could say, and the Barcelona mayorship and the Balearic Islands, and they work to promote Catalan culture abroad. So that goes from promoting translations, as with this case, right? But also we do performing arts, and we have professorships at various universities to teach Catalan, so we fund those. So it's basically funding, promotion, and various collaborations abroad. So that's Institute Ramon Llull. I'm trying to remember your other questions.
That was how you came to her. But one thing that's fun about Ramon Llull with the promotions is that we've talked about this on one of our earlier podcasts, but for anyone who doesn't know, Open Letter published a book called 1,000 Morons by Kim Man-zo some years ago, and 1,000 Morons is a collection of short stories, the first one of which features a guy going to meet his dad at his dad's retirement home, and throughout the whole story his dad is cross-dressing, so he's putting on his bra, putting on his wig, putting on all this stuff, and so we made the cover has a bra on it with like a mustache, and the Ramon Yule sponsored us to print 1,000 t-shirts that have a bra on them and the sign that just says 1,000 morons, and distribute these for free to 1,000 quote-unquote morons throughout the country to take pictures and post them on Instagram and elsewhere with like 1,000 morons hashtags. So you guys are fairly adventurous in your promotional...
We're open, we're adventurous, we're obviously very cutting edge, right? So that's good, yeah.
So how did you come to Rodoreda?
Rodoreda, well, she's pretty much the most famous Catalan writer, so that's, I guess, how I came to her. I read her the first time when I was in college. I read it in Catalan, which may have been a mistake because I'm not actually Catalan. So I think I got a lot of it, but this time when I came back because of this podcast and decided to actually read it in English, I was floored. I was just like, oh my God, I just discovered the best writer in the world.
Did you read? So you read this in college?
No, I read. Well, it wasn't an assignment. I just read it on my own accord. But it was in Diamond Square. Yep. Time of the Doves.
So how many people here are familiar with Rodoreda? 1, 1.5, 2.5, 3. Okay. So I'm going to turn this to you to explain a little bit about her as her figure, at least in Catalan literature.
Well, her figure in Catalan literature, that's a pretty big deal. But I think one of the main things is that she's absolutely brilliant, but maybe wasn't as well known as she should have been at the time when she was writing. Because she was born, was it 1902 or 1912? Some one of those. And she died in 1983, right? But in the meantime, she was in exile. She went to Geneva and Paris, right? So I don't know. Yeah, she had to. For anyone who's not familiar with the history, like during the Franco period in Spain, she had to leave because you couldn't speak Catalan. Catalan was banned. Basically, anyone that was working in Catalan, she worked for the Catalan government, which was basically outlawed. There's no possible way that you could really survive and be okay in Catalonia during the Franco period. And then there's like more to her biography that I am not an expert on, but in which she was sort of forced more or less to marry her uncle for financial and status reasons, and they went into exile, lived in France for a period of time, which was then taken over by the Nazis during World War II, so they fled to Switzerland, where she finally started writing again, came into her own as a writer, started having an affair with this other Catalan intellectual who was living there, had a kid, which comes up in relation to this book. She had a child that she didn't really want, and that was not part of her lifestyle, and that she was not necessarily, the most mothering mother to, and that shows up a lot in this book. And then over the course of between 56, thereabouts, to the end of her life, she produced a ton of short story collections and became incredibly well known as a short story writer. I believe the Mercè Rodoreda Prize is for a short story collection that's given out every year, I believe, in Catalonia. Yeah, pretty sure. And then she wrote a number of novels, and the one that's most famous is what would be In Diamond Square, but you may have heard of it in English as The Time of the Doves. It was published in the 60s originally, 60-something, early 60s.
That was a Lifetime movie, In the Time of the Doves. That's not a book. It sounds like a Lifetime movie where the husband ends up being the killer, and then the lady finds out, and...
when she finds the dove in his bag is really the main clue. And it is kind of a Lifetime movie, to be honest.
That's a terrible translation for In the Time of the Doves.
Especially because it was about pigeons, right?
Yeah, it's supposed to be pigeons.
Pigeons. Whatever. Yeah. The Time of the Pigeons apparently was denied. But it is kind of a Lifetime movie, is the thing, is that it's a lot of her stories, that early novel, all very much deal with a woman that has a relationship in which, if you read any Rodoreda books at all, especially her stories, if there's a relationship, that shit is going wrong. There's never going to work out. The man is every time going to cheat on you. Shit is never going to be okay.
It kind of makes you want to, if you're in a relationship, it makes you want to check your partner's email.
For sure.
And just, read it. Just surreptitiously when they're not around. You're so distrusting of your partner after reading Rodoreda. It's awful.
Even if she was the one who cheated, right?
I know.
Yeah. Then again, again on her uncle. That's a plus. I think you should check on your uncle.
More wine before you go looking at somebody's phone and their text messages. Come on up. Don't be shy.
But so In Time of the Doves does deal with like those. It's very domestic in a lot of ways. It's a beautiful book. It was performed here by Jessica Lange at the Baryshnikov Theater a number of years ago. She did a whole presentation, read it as like a one-woman play, and it's incredibly moving. It's very sad. It takes place over this whole woman's life, but it is more or less conventional in a lot of ways. Around that same time, she wrote this book, Death in Spring. Submitted it for a competition, lost, and her partner was like, that's good, because you need to keep working on this. So she proceeded to work on it for 22 years and created what is one of the strangest, most captivating, kind of bizarre novels I've ever read.
This
and I've published lots of weird
book
things.
is insane.
Do you want you describe it?
No. All right, so I'll give you a brief overview. So it's supposed to be maybe allegorical to fascism in Spain, but it's this weird town, and they've got weird rituals. One which includes, when it's your time to die, you cut open a tree and you put yourself inside the tree, and so like your blood comes out of you. But before you die from your blood spilling everywhere, they pour cement down your throat so your soul doesn't escape. And then there's a river, and you have to cast lots or something. If you get the bad stick, you go into the river and you have to go under the rocks of the city, and it rips your face off and you die basically. And then you eat horse meat and horse fat. And I mean, these are just broad brushstrokes, but that you get the gist of it. It's the town.
So it's a very bizarre village.
Yeah.
The narrator of the book is...
I want to make a kid's coloring book for this one, actually. And, it'd be a great way to get kids into Catalan literature, hopefully. Because Johnny's in the tree, dying. Get the cement. Pour it in his mouth. Can you color the cement?
Dies.
Yeah.
Maybe block his breath.
No, it's really bizarre, but the strange thing is it's juxtaposed with some of the most dense, beautiful prose you're ever going to read. So it's just devastatingly beautiful and poignant, and then at the same time you're like, oh my God, this is disgusting. It's really, really crazy impressive. Like, I've never read anything like it.
And to try and fill it in a little bit in terms of the plot per se, it's all told through the point of view of this narrator who's this young boy. In the opening scenes, he sees this man in the forest where dead people are, which is essentially their graveyard, but everyone's buried within a tree, so that's a little weird. Things are a little off. It has a lot of nature that's going on in the first section as he's like swimming and a bee's following him. It seems very nice. Then he realizes that this person who's like going through the forest, chopping open this tree and wanting to kill himself is his father. So he sort of spies on his father committing suicide. And as a result of not being allowed to commit suicide, the townspeople come rip his dad out of the tree, pour the cement down his throat, and stuff him back in. Then, in the second part, our narrator is essentially married to his stepmom, who is a slightly 1 year older child that was barely his stepmom. It was like a girl that kind of followed his dad around. And so they have like these adventures of like disrupting the nature of the town. This village runs on all these rituals. Things have to happen every year like clockwork, or else bad shit will happen. So there's a Signor on the hill that looks down that enforces these rituals. The cement has to go into your throat, or else your soul will escape. If your soul escapes, like winds will destroy the town. There's a river that runs under it, as you mentioned. If someone doesn't get sent under the river to clean out the rocks every year, the water will overflow the town and everyone will drown. There's a prisoner there's always a prisoner that's in a cage who's committed theft or burnt things down, and he stays in the cage until he becomes horse-like and no longer human, and then they can let him out. Otherwise, everything will go to hell. There's all these rituals.
Take a breath. Hold on, man. Jeez Louise. Just pouring weird stuff on top of weird stuff.
Well, yeah. And I guess the question is sort of, with all these rituals that are sort of preventing the town from dying out or whatever, like, is it worth it, or are these rituals just extremely cruel and making your life kind of a hell on earth situation, right?
And that does seem to play out in like the second and third parts as the narrator sort of with his stepmother disrupts it. They go and they tear all the bones out of the tree.
They're messing up the cycles, right?
They mess up the cycles.
Continuous cycles of life and birth and life and birth. And
or is it life and death?
Death, birth. And they're hooligans. Yeah.
Yes. And then the third part is that they had a child, And she's 4 years old, I think 4 years old.
Trigger warning, this doesn't go well, by the way.
Yeah. I was naming Jesus. So she plays a lot with the blacksmith's son. Ends up where, because of like the senior comes down on the hill, calls the narrator up there and is like, I have to tell you something. My message is, do not let me die like everyone else. And he wants to violate these cycles as well and disrupt it. Things go wrong. The town gets burnt. The child dies. And he has to bury his daughter. And then the fourth part, the part that we're going to talk about mainly tonight, is now he's left alone. And you get back to that question of like, what is this worth? Why does this town exist? How does this exist? And like how this like sort of plays into Catalan history, something that I don't know enough about really in terms of like the Franco-Spanish situation. But there does seem to be a number of metaphors for like how things were imposed, rules were imposed. You have to keep order. If the order isn't kept, then things will fall apart. And every time you try and break that, society either does something to force you back into following those rules or just ostracizes you. And like in this case, like our narrator ends up being the one who's chosen to go through the river, and because his face gets ripped apart and he's cleared out and saved the village by clearing out these rocks, he's also the one that no one will speak to.
Yeah, it's a frightening first sentence for part 4. It starts, many people accompanied me as I prepared to swim under the village. And in the previous parts, everybody that went under the village is either horrifically maimed and ostracized or completely dead. So they're like, oh, great, our protagonist is about to die. Wonderful. Let's dig in.
Yeah, I mean, the way it starts is sort of horrifying. And I guess if you could compare it to Franco's Spain, which I'm not an expert on, but I could still say a few things, right? We have this sort of moral system that isn't really based on ethics or on science, right, or on the correct answers or on the right way you should behave, but more on control, right, and on tradition and kind of burning out desire, which is what sort of keeps coming up in this book, right? And when you are reading in this very first part, it says kind of, everyone's face bespoke a craving, although what they wished was not really clear to them. They just wished it at whatever cost. So they kind of get to this point where they can't even identify what they want, right? With all of these traditions and there's no sort of consequence if you do something bad. The consequences come if you just get out of these rituals, right?
Yeah. Goodness.
I thought you were going to take that and
no, I'm just trying to like have holiday cheer while talking about death in spring, doing my best for stay
It's kind of crazy because it's such a dense book and it's so full of poetry, but at the same time I wouldn't say that it's a hard book.
No.
I mean, because everyone has this idea like, okay, maybe if it's so packed, maybe it's just going to be a pain in the ass to read, but really I was mesmerized. I couldn't stop reading it. And it kind of ruined my life a little bit. It also made it, it's kind of, there's such an attention to detail that is very beautiful and at the same time it's horrifying. Because there's a lot of nature, like you were saying, and we have this tendency to think that nature is beautiful and tranquilizing, and here it's kind of the opposite.
Yeah, or it can be. Like, the nature stuff runs throughout her books, and it's like, it always is both things. Like, at some points in time, like, if the flowers are blooming, the relationship's good, things are okay. But then at other points in time, there's this, like, kind of grotesqueness to, like, things blossoming where they're breaking out of, like, their buds, or they're kind of, the vines are always attacking the houses and attacking the side of the hill. Like there's a...
They reuse that word up-wrenching.
Yeah, up-wrenching. Everything's being up-wrenched.
Yeah.
Yeah, the river wants to get rid of the town, right? Like there's... yeah.
And there's like... And we're emphasizing the weirdness of it, and like, which does play well to the coloring book, where you have like, look at the prisoner turn into a horse.
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
Yeah. And I think look at them eat fat. There is that part of it, but what's great about this book, in my opinion, is that all of those things are they're treated as they are. Like they're not exoticized as like this is some weird thing that's going on in the city. It's just like that's part of the city, that's part of this village, that's part of this life. And at some point they start to almost map onto things that we do in our normal lives, or like normal or people can do, of like these sort of rituals that happen every year. The way that like innocuously we put up trees at the holidays or decorate things or whatever, that's not damaging the way that going through a river to knock stones out so the water doesn't kill the village is. But it's not. There's something there still, and this kind of like belief in rebirth. In this chapter, he ends up. I'm not going to find it right off the bat, but like at one point he talks about like dying and thinking that about his dad's death and saying like, this is stupid. She shouldn't call it death. We should call it deaths, plural, because once you die, you go inside something else that dies, and that thing dies, and everything will die. And like there's always this kind of idea that there'll be this rebirth and it'll be great, but at the same time, there's this like endless entropy. This is also, I'm not making this sound fun. This is a fun book to read, but I'm not finding the right way to tell you guys that it is actually very enjoyable.
No, I think it's great because it's absolutely brutal and absolutely beautiful at the same time. That's really hard to do, and this is done so masterfully. It's insane.
And it's 100% different than In the Time of the Doves, or whatever, in Diamond Square, the other title that it's been translated as. Like, that is much more straightforward in a lot of ways and deals with these emotions in like more conventional ways. And this is, the language is weird, things are inverted,
time is crazy weird.
Yeah, it's very circular. Sometimes you have a lot of repetition, right? And even at the end when he's kind of doing that ritual where he's swimming under the river, which is sort of a punishment he got for thinking differently, I guess.
Yeah,
maybe.
And
but while he's under it, he keeps sort of remembering all these things that happened to him, and sometimes he's like, no, that didn't happen, then it happened after. And it's kind of, the textures is all interwoven, right? So it's kind of, it's a rebellion against time in a way that makes it a rebellion against plot.
I feel bad for the people just listening because they missed some really good hand gestures that brought that whole thing home right there. The interweaving, I like that. That made it work for me. So, like, each section had kind of these, she's so good at stitching everything together. Like, something that seems just a little detail in the beginning of the first part will like really bring home at the end of the first part. And this one, I noticed there was a whole bunch of talk about time, about hands, about creating things with your hands, and then snakes, and like circular snakes, and the Ouroboros is mentioned in this, which has to do with like cycles in creation, destruction, life, and death. Like that theme is all the way throughout this one as well.
Yeah, the creation thing to me was interesting because as someone who was born in this village, you're kind of immediately a victim of all of these traditions.
Oh, so one thing I forgot we should mention, though, is that the kids are locked into cupboards while all the traditions are happening. So they don't get to view anything that's going on until a certain time in their life. And so that's why this narrator is really neat, because he's experiencing all the new traditions, and so you're following along with him, learning about it. Like, they lock kids in the cupboard.
Yeah.
Which is, it's cheaper than a babysitter, but maybe not really nice.
It was cheaper than a babysitter in the immediate term, but long-term therapy-wise, like your future value is not really there. Like you're missing out.
Yeah. So, but like what I was going to say is like being born as victims, which is what happens when you get locked in a cupboard.
Yeah.
Right.
That's crazy.
Then this guy, he gets thrown under the river to sort of save the town or whatever, which is sort of his punishment. And when he gets out, he decides to create this little village of clay people.
Yep.
And then he doesn't treat them well. Like he's great.
Which is the part that I really wanted to talk about too. I'm just going to try and find it, but I'm not going to right now. Is that so he keeps recreating them. Like he creates this idea of this village because he's been ostracized. He's gone into the forest. There's been shadow things that happen. People hate him because he walks around at night. And then he creates these clay figurines and like attacks them, drowns them, melts them, remakes them,
repairs them just to damage them again.
And
the cycle, right? Yeah.
And that reminded me of like being like a artist or writer or creator at the same time, or like he's sort of playing God with those figures or with creating that thing, but in a way it's sort of like the author creating the sort of symbols and the sort of characters and just moving them in the way that you want them to have this larger symbolic effect. Like this book's so much more symbolic and so much more layered than say Time of the Doves, where most everything's kind of concrete and on the level. This has so many things where I don't know how to feel about how to interpret it. Like we talked about the Franco thing, but I don't feel like that's not even scratches the surface of what this book really is. It's so much more like Finnegan's Wake in the sense that it's like layered imagery that keeps cycling, keeps coming back, and you keep having different emotions and relationships to it. But I don't know. What did you guys?
I have a question for you though. Have you noticed then with the new? You published this a while ago, right?
Yeah.
2009?
9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you noticed then with the new, like, I didn't know much about Catalonia until all of a sudden Google News, it's on there every day, and so I have to oh shit, I better learn about this.
How many people knew Catalan was a language before there's one person in the room?
So shit has totally hit the fan right now with Spain and Catalonia. Is there a resurgence and interest in Death in Spring in particular? With this happening now?
Your expertise, though.
Aren't you the publisher? I don't know.
Well, with this book?
Yeah.
Because this seems like perfectly wonderful and timely for something oppressive, trying to break out of cycles, or this seems like a really great time for this book.
It would, yeah.
Given politically the climate that's going on over there.
I was, as you could see, working on our sales reports on the train this morning, and I can tell you that over the time that we've been doing this podcast, which coincided with the referendum and with everything that was going on, the sales have gone up considerably, but I think that's because of us. I'm going to take credit. I think we should take credit for that one. I don't think it's the world, but I do think that,
obviously,
I think it should be, it would make sense, but I think that you would have to have the right... I think people that are looking for things about Catalonia are going to find Mercè Rodoreda. And when they find Mercè Rodoreda, the first thing they're going to find is Death in Spring. The people who love this book, they're legion, and they're generally big-name people. We had this featured by Jesmyn Ward on NPR not that many years ago. John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats is, constantly referring to her as one of his favorite authors, and how this book opened his mind to what literature could be. There's a lot of people like that. So I think you find her if you're looking for information on Catalonia and culture. It's too bad that the environment that we live in, that media that's covering the situation in the referendum and all the protests and everything that's going on doesn't also say if FYI, if you want some more information about the culture, you should look at these authors or these articles or this music or whatever. That part I don't know.
Yeah, what do they know?
Yeah, I think if that happened, I think it would be really intense, because you can read this for the endless cycle. We mentioned this earlier too, but the National Day of Independence for Catalonia is based on a defeat.
Yeah, it's not independent, it's quite the contrary.
Yeah, it's we lost this battle, so let's celebrate every year for the next 500 years, which is not how most countries do that. So they
have shit logs at Christmas?
They have shit logs, as we've talked about.
This is a real thing.
Yeah, I'm not making this up. I just learned that.
you hit this log and then it's shit's candy.
Yeah, and so instead of up on the shelf, you have a log, and the parents put candy in front of it and then eat the candy when the kids go to bed because the shit log ate the candy, and then when it's the right day, you beat the shit log until it gives you presents. This is insane.
See, the river thing is not that weird now.
No,
now that I hear that,
and
this town's not that weird.
But that sort of I don't know why to say that sort of mentality. But in this book, there's a lot of that kind of. There's something oppressive, and you are born as a victim. Things are oppressive, so it does sort of fit with what's going on now in politics, where Catalonia is just we just want to vote, which is, really simplifying things, but we just want to vote on being able to be independent. And Spain's no, you can't do that. And this sort of, we're going to go through this kind of cycle and repress you and keep you down and not allow you to notice.
I would say this book is sort of highly philosophical, right? It's kind of saying that when you're a victim, you might not necessarily be separated from the perpetrator, right? So that kind of hones in on something very specific, it seems. And I remember there was one part where he says when he's remembering his child, and he thinks the saddest part for me is that she's going to see what's going on without knowing why, or something like that, right? And it's kind of it seems to me to be pointing to the system that might be beyond religion or beyond politics and more about science, maybe, or about kind of this seeking for why things happen without it having to be this superstition and this crazy thing where you have to be randomly controlling things, and then stuff can happen to you and you don't know why, and people can hate you and you don't know why. Right? So
yeah.
How long did it take her to write? 30 years?
20
something?
Well, because she edited it for 22 years, right? And then,
so we have a question for you.
Well, I don't know if I'll know the answer.
Okay, so And this is I'm back. People have listened to all the podcasts, so you'll know where this is coming from. But yeah, so she worked on it for a number of years. There are a couple different versions of this book that exist. So like my understanding was that since it wasn't published when she died, it wasn't that it was incomplete, but that she was constantly refining it. And you read any part of this, and we should read a few sections at some point here. Although, like, the ones I keep looking for that are most pertinent to our conversation are from earlier sections, but that's fine. But if you read any part of this, you'll see how intricate and how perfected the prose is and how it's structured. That's absolutely the case. So I feel like when she passed away, she was still, even further refining that. But the story was done. The idea of this cycle was done. All the sort of motifs with the bees, with the honey, with the hand, all of that kind of has found its place. However, we found out recently that there's a new edition of this that came out in, you look surprised, in Spain, that was based on correspondence between her and her editor, Juan Sales, who has a book out recently from New York Review of Books, and that they went back and there's differences, and the ending is different. And I think for the purposes of this, since we're doing this in front of a group of people who have not read this book, let us save the ending, at least. Okay. So we've sort of spoiled other surprises that you get along the way, because one of the big functions, big motors or engines for how this book works is that it builds a world. Like, you usually think of world building with sci-fi, with Game of Thrones or whatever, but it really functions in here in this very unique and interesting way of giving you kind of pieces of what this village is and what these
there's a fable characteristic throughout the whole thing. Sure.
Yeah, and we've sort of spoiled bits of that, but we won't spoil the end. But the ending to this new version is different, and supposedly it's become a big hit and a bestseller in Spain right now. You look like you have no idea what we're talking about.
No, I have no idea. I guess. Okay. Yeah, but that's cool. You should keep talking about it.
Well, that's all I know. I don't know what the different ending is. This came up on last week, actually.
I think, but what I was getting at is that it's a short book, right? It's
super short. Yeah.
It's 150 pages, and you're looking at 20 plus years of work going into 150 pages, and you can tell that it was worked. It's so dense, layered. It's perfect. It's so good. And if you like that kind of stuff, this is something you really got to read. It's really, I've never read anything like this. It really opened my eyes.
And it absolutely is both, I think, appealing to people who like plots and people who like poetry, which is unusual.
Well, I don't like anything, and I like this, so that's good, right?
Fair enough.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Well, I found a passage that I could read, the one about death.
The many deaths?
Yeah, on page 139. So it's kind of, well, let's see. So, where did it begin to kill? Where did each person's death reside? In sleep or in the awakening? Did death die tired from having killed? That to me is the best part. Did death die tired from having killed? When skin turned cold, flesh hardened, and all grew icy and wooden, where had death gone? If death was each person and each person was death, why don't we refer to deaths? The deaths of men and women, deaths waiting inside like the worms of misery, the deaths of children, silent, hidden, ready for the stone to strike. So, yeah.
I really like that section, too. That was one of the ones that I marked. The other one that I really like because of this destruction is there's a part on 133 where the blacksmith's son is telling him basically all his lessons.
You asshole, that was mine. Alright, go ahead.
Me too, I heard that one right.
Jerk.
Learn to make fire by rubbing sticks together. Learn to start a fire and you'll be happy. A fire that causes damage. I absolutely love that part too.
Yeah, that's good. Whatever.
Yeah.
You probably saw me underline that and took it from me.
Yeah, I was peeking over on the train.
But there's a couple lines before that I think are also kind of relevant to the discussion. So it says, don't think about it. You have to believe that it's all the same to have a face or have your forehead ripped away. It's all the same to live or die if you have to live as I was made to live. Learn to make fire by rubbing sticks together. Right? So that kind of part before it is just saying how his life is and how much this village has worked to push desire out of him, which seems to be the only driving force in life. So once you lose desire, what do you have? You have this apathy, maybe. And that's kind of what keeps you alive if you don't care if you're alive or dead.
I have a question. What do you make of these shadows?
The shadows. Man,
because I don't even know. What is there an English translation for the shadow people? Because it has
no, they're called the Caramanes, and they are in other things they're. I don't know if anyone here watched the movie Pan Negra, Black Bread. Right? But there was this sort of mythological creature that was kind of like a shadow, and it was killing people and whatnot.
So you can play it's like a Catalan sort of myth or a figure?
I mean, it's something that has been recurring, but then again, maybe it's not specific to Catalan. Maybe it's in, I don't know, it's also in Mexican literature, I guess. But yeah, I think when there's something really evil that you can explain, and depending on who you are, like if you're a child, maybe you'll think it's the Caramans, or if you're very ignorant, or if you don't have science yet, you might think that it's
Republicans.
It's a shadow, Republicans.
Here, let me. So to tie into that, just for a second of known minds, here's a section from way back at the beginning in 18. This gives you an idea. It's a little bit of a longer paragraph, but it gives you an idea of the way that her kind of myth making works in this novel. So on a slope, man met shadow, and they never parted. They established the village. The man, the shadow by his side, planted the first wisteria. But that's not exactly how it was. A long time ago, when the oldest of the old men in the village was young, he witnessed the birth of everything. The village was born from the earth's terrible unrest. The mountain was cleaved, and it collapsed into the river, scattering the water through the fields. But the river wanted to flow with all its great water gathered together and began burrowing beneath the crumpled mountain, emptying it little by little. The river never rested until all the water could flow happily together again, although at times it grew furious when it hit the rock ceiling. They say that one night, not at the bottom of the slope, but on the ground, on the rocks hurled from the cliff, the moon showed two shadows joined at the mouth, and it rained blood. That is how it all began. Just kind of, that's amazing. I love the crumpled mountains, but also that this is their whole story, essentially.
Yeah.
Is that in microcosm is the rest of this novel. In a lot of ways, like the water, the water hitting the ceiling, or the water rising to hit the ceiling, all those various pieces kind of fall together. But the shadows show up there in this kind of like pre-birth sort of way, or like creating the world, and then later on they show up as kind of his ending, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So like another small example, I'll give one, that way I can feel like I'm sort of contributing. On page 122. So, like, the beginning of this book, you get all the one, like, he's kind of in a harmony with nature, and he's very innocent, and it's kind of wonderful. He's playing with the bee, he's swimming in the water. This is before his face got ripped off, and he saw his dad die inside a tree with cement down his throat. So, after all that, you get something like this. My life had been filled with the struggle of growing, the kind of death my father endured, everything he did to me, everything that happened around me. Life had turned ugly from so much living. That's so brutal and so pretty at the same time. This book is devastating, and I don't want to look at it anymore.
Yeah. I mean,
but it's back to like the full circle thing, right?
Yeah, there was... Well, I guess I don't want to say the ending, actually. But, I just have a question. I have a question. So the thing about stuffing people's throats with cement, so the whole point is, like, if you don't do that, then your soul can escape before you die. And there is a mountain where they try to get this pink powder every year, and it's full of these souls that are making wind, and they make it impossible to get the stupid pink powder, so it's a pain in the ass.
We sound high as fuck.
I know. I was just going to say, like, this is like, just like drunk history for like a Game of Thrones.
Well, you got to get the magic powder so you can go under the river before your face gets ripped off from the tree.
But I guess that question is, so they have this whole thing to stop the souls from leaving, but some people don't want that, right? Like the señor who's on the mountain, who seems to be like exempt from most of the other traditions.
Broke my soul.
Yeah, he wanted to die alone, but then like he just told one person, "Just let me die alone." And that one person, which is the narrator, tells the blacksmith, and they all go and try to kill him and stuff his throat with cement or whatever. And my question is, like, do they stuff the throat with cement out of pity? Like, is it supposed to help them in the afterlife, or is it the contrary? Or like, what did you guys think? That's my question.
There was an interesting... someone brought the point of it had something to do with not being able to speak and, like, repression, and there's, like, this overall feeling of trapping things where it's, like, you don't get to leave here. You're stuck here. You're confined here. Your soul doesn't get to escape. Your soul stays here. It stays in this forest. It doesn't come to us. It stays here. And there's always this weird sense of control, that kind of fascist feeling everywhere is what someone said, and I just thought it sounded cool. But
I think there's two like that related that like there is. I took it more as the village wants to protect itself. and then they cement it because the village believes that if the souls are left to roam, bad things could happen. That's unpredictable. That's not the way we do things. There's a great bit in here that's very much of our times too, where someone's like, why do we have to do this anymore? We should do something different. And it's like, the people who are young were all like, yeah, we agree with that. The middle-aged people were like, I don't know. And the old people were like, no, we've always done it this way, so we're going to keep it the same way. And it does, and then it remains in that sort of pattern. And I feel like almost there's like an inertia with that. Like, why do you have wakes or funerals in the way that you do? Because that's the way that you're supposed to deal with death. How do they deal with death? They put cement in your mouth.
And they all want to watch it too.
And they all want to be there. And yeah, but I mean, okay, so their excitement is weird, maybe, but like the rest of it, like you can still. There's a lot of these things that seem strange, but I feel like there are parts of our life that sort of reflect that. Of how do you deal with the idea of death? How do you deal with the idea of things ending? How do you deal with the idea of like having or giving birth or having a child? And like there's many points in here I reference her having Rodoreda's child because the stepmom, whose daughter this is, says at many points in time, like, I don't want her. Like, why am I supposed to love this person? Like, I don't have to do this. Like, I don't want to. And there's a lot of, like, challenges with that show up in here. And, like, you rely upon the way that things have been, how they get done, how they've been done in the past to, like, afford a sense of comfort. And the village is constantly seeking that because it's, like, sort of like a remote. My sense is that it's remote and that it's ruled by almost like these strange, like that's just how it has to be. There's no other way out. And anytime someone tries to get out, the fire destroys them, the cement destroys them, and they're buried in a tree.
It's interesting that there is no outside really in this novel. Yeah. There's nothing but this village. And like the furthest thing in this village is maybe the man who lives on a mountain. But there's nothing beyond that, right? Yeah.
And he barely lives on the mountain.
Mm-hmm. On a hill.
He's like on a hill with vines overtaking it that people have to keep cutting down because he's important.
And you can see him from other parts of the village, so it's not that far, I guess.
Yeah. Can't possibly. So if our last book was like the Ulysses, this really is for me the Finnegan's Wake of like that sort of cyclical, strange, and like all the ways to interpret it. So we did have one question from beforehand, which I had open here. Let me see. Hope it's still open. Okay. The question was, if Rodoreda were to be first published today, like pretend that this book, Death in Spring, came out this year in 2017 for the first time and was the first book of hers ever to be published, how do you think she would be received? More intensely? Instant blow-up bestseller? Would it destroy Bronte and leave her in the dust? Or would she have the same fervent, near-niche following that she has today?
Wow.
All yours. You're...
If it were published today, I think it would be shocking. I mean, I think I think we forgive a lot of it, or I don't know if forgive, but accept a lot of its strangeness by thinking that it's from somewhere far away in another language and from a few decades ago.
You know what I think? I think it would be like what's his name, Jeff Vandermeer, whose book's right there, the Area X books. Like, it would appeal to those people more broadly because it would be reviewed within that context where there's a strange place, this strange set of things that are going on that you can't explain. I think it would actually be fairly successful. Or more I mean, it's our best-selling book.
I don't mean,
so, like, it's not
I didn't say
shocking
as in unsuccessful. I think it would be compared to The Road, like, you know, or to magic realism, right? But The Road, in terms of the trance-like quality, I think... It's kind of close, but this one seems to have more colors, so it's kind of more attractive to
me. You're the.
I'm surprised anybody buys anything other than coloring books, so I'd just be happy if they're reading it.
I think we're going to have to rephrase this question. Okay, say this came out with the coloring book pages inserted.
Okay,
so every so often it's like,
bestseller.
How are you feeling?
No, I think this is going to have a cult audience. It's,
no matter what.
It's so freaking weird and it's so intense. It's hard to like recommend this to a lot of people. You only recommend it to your like really book nerd friends.
Yeah,
who are gonna nerd out on it. Like it's like trying to like have my mom who watches Transformer movies. Hey, you want to watch a French film? You might like it. It's really good cinema. Like, are there robots fighting? No, but you know, it'd be hard to recommend this to a lot of people.
I don't
be
know.
Like a bestseller.
I don't think bestseller is going too far, but I think people are more accepting this kind of thing than not.
Yes.
Because we have been sort of brought into that. We are publishing it. When we published it, it was already a classic in another language. And it did very well. Her last book that we did, War, So Much War, which had never been translated before at all, and was published around the same time, like the year that she died, essentially. That was reviewed in the New Yorker. It was very popular for us as well, and had a lot of good responses. So I think readers are more open. Like, sure, they're literary, but that's a wide group still. I have faith in y'all.
Well, we've been super confusing. Do you guys have any questions about the book? I'd love to make up an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I said shocking, I'd never mean that in a bad way. I think
no. Yeah, I got
this
you.
is definitely the best book I've read this year for sure. You know, and I've read a lot of books this year.
In terms of Catalan literature, best book from Catalan ever?
In terms of, well, I don't think I've read enough Catalan to say that this is the best ever, but the ones that I've read, yeah, I think so. Shoots. Hopefully no authors are listening to me, but yeah.
The thing
is always be
she's
better.
the best.
Yeah.
It's
kind of like the Bible. It's better than all the other.
Sure. But we've been talking to some really great writers, and when you ask them about Mercè Rodoreda, they're like, "Oh my God, like she's
it's
it.
Overwhelming.
Like, she is it. Like she's top. She's on the Rushmore of if there was a Rushmore there. Like, and I had no. I feel really dumb that I don't know her. I don't know, and she's that important. You start reading her work, and then you realize, like, oh my God, she's incredible.
You know, here's a different take on the question that was asked, though, is that if she had published this originally, well, you could speak Catalan at the time that this came out, but had this come out during her lifetime in a period like today in Spain, that would be a different situation, I think. Because Catalan literature seems like it was always sort of pushed to the side to some degree. Like there's people who can read Catalan, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're in Catalonia, you can speak Catalan for the most part, or nowadays especially. But there was a generation in which people weren't speaking Catalan, weren't reading in Catalan. That wasn't Catalan kind of culture was sort of underground in a lot of ways and tamped down. So you have sort of a dead period in the middle of the 20th century. And now there's sort of a resurgence of interest in speaking it, knowing about the writers, the artists, the all
that's for sure.
People.
I mean, there's definitely a very vibrant editorial world in Catalonia today, and there's a lot of literature going on. But it's still true that I think it's probably still more likely for you to be, if you're writing Catalan, to be translated to German than it is to Spanish. So you're still not going to be famous in Spain.
That's insane. In Spain. But
go to the vast majority. Jonah, isn't it like 60% of the Catalan, the people in Catalonia who buy books, prefer to buy them in Spanish and read in Spanish if that's an option?
Well, I'm sure that might be the case, because usually when you're promoted to read in a certain language, and people are always telling you, okay, this is a literary language, this is where you're going to find all your authors, you kind of put it on another level, sometimes even without thinking. So maybe that's the language they're used to reading in. So, and that can be sort of a sad thing, but it's definitely something I've encountered. I mean, I'm Mexican, right? And I remember growing up when I would hear something in Spanish from Spain, which now I would totally reject this notion, right? But this is kind of like a more raw feeling. I would think, oh, that's so much more formal. And maybe it's not more formal, it's just a different dialect of Spanish, right? So, and this same kind of, I guess, internal colonialism can go on even within Spain, I would say.
I do think that, like, Spanish, like the books from Spain versus books from, say, Argentina or from other parts of the Spanish-speaking world do seem to be more formal and more, the sentence structures are more like Javier Marias, they're more like Baroque, they're longer, they're more sort of...
But I don't know if that's more formal or just closer to French, because they're still in that continent.
Okay. Like,
that's kind of...
Mannered, I think, instead of formal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas Mexican writers, Argentine writers seem to be more fluid. Catalan writers are a little bit different.
But maybe that's your association with fluidity because you're in the United States. And, like, people in this continent, like in the whole America, are sort of more influenced by American writing, maybe.
Right, not fluid. Fluid's the wrong word. More, not more experimental, because that's the wrong word. Whatever it is. There's difference. There's a difference.
Yeah. But I'm trying to think of this one example. I forget what book it was. Oh, I think it was Jo Confesso by Jaume Cabrera. translated to the German. I think there were like 5 editions. Don't quote me on this. I know everyone's listening, so now it's registered, but that's not the right amount. But it was republished many, many times.
Christina Hall, actually, in all things Catalan and Spanish literature. Let's just remind you.
I just remember that this was an example from my master's in translation in Barcelona. And there's like in Spain.
In this.
Yeah, I know, it's embarrassing. I'm sorry, but in Spain it wasn't published as much, and it wasn't sold, and it wasn't reviewed, and it's just not promoted.
Yeah.
So, and that's just kind of the way things were and still are in many cases. Even though now, like, there is obviously freedom to publish. I say that from the outside because I don't really know how it is on the inside, but there is a freedom to publish, and you do have Catalan authors, and you have a lot of incentives to write in Catalan, but there's still a market that you might not reach, and that's in your country, right? So,
right, which is wild. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've talked long enough. Does anyone have any questions? If not, come by.
Have some wine.
Spring, have some wine. Buy other books here at McNally Jackson. I want to thank McNally Jackson again. I want to thank the Institute Ramon Llull for sponsoring this. Thank all of you guys for coming out. Give a round of applause, because, not for us, but just so that people can hear it. So they know that they were really and have some.
And pick up Death in Spring. This book is fantastic.
And we have 2 more books of hers coming in the not too distant future that we haven't spoiled for you in any way, shape, or form.
Become fans. It's worth it.
We'll be back next week.